Imagine you trip, fall, break something, a bone. Your first thought is probably, okay, just put it back together. Simple, right?
So simple.
Yeah, but the way the body actually fixes itself, especially when surgeons get involved with hardware, well, it's surprisingly complex and honestly, pretty fascinating. So our deep dive today, it's all about internal fixation, fixing bones from the inside. We're focusing specifically on fractures, particularly in the jaw, your mandible.
The bone you chew and talk with. Crucial bit of kit.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And we're going to explore the maybe surprising differences between what surgeons call rigid and non-rigid ways of fixing these breaks. Our mission then is to unpack not just what these terms mean, but, why the difference is so important, how it affects healing itself, and some of the maybe counterintuitive things that guide a surgeon's decision. We're pulling insights from a really great expert chapter on this.
Yeah, it's a dense topic, but really interesting when you get into it.
Okay, let's dig in. So, internal fixation, the basics.
At its heart, it's putting hardware things like wires, screws, plates, rods, pins directly onto the bones. The goal is to hold the broken pieces stable while they heal.
Right. Hardware inside. But you said the type of fixation changes things.
Massively. That's where rigid versus non-rigid comes in. Rigid internal fixation. Oh, it's any method that's strong enough to stop any movement between the bone fragments.
Any movement at all, even when you're like chewing.
Exactly. No interfragmentary motion during active use. Absolute stillness across the fracture line.
And getting that perfect stillness must involve actually seeing the break, right?
Usually, yes.
Yeah.
It typically requires what we call open reduction, surgically exposing the bone to line up the fragments just right.
Okay, so what kind of hardware are we talking about for a rigid fixation in the jaw? What does that look like?
In the mandible, common examples are, say, using 2 lag screws across the fracture, or maybe 2 bone plates, or sometimes a single large compression plate that actively squeezes the ends together. Another option is a big reconstruction bone plate. These are quite thick, very strong, and usually need at least 3 screws on each side of the break to guarantee that rock-solid stability.
Okay, so that's the no movement allowed approach. What about the other side, non-rigid fixation? Is it just everything else?
Pretty much, yeah. By definition, non-rigid fixation is any technique that doesn't meet that strict no-motion criteria.
Yeah.
It allows for some degree of movement between the fragments.
Can you give an example?
Sure. Think about a simple transosseous wire. Just a wire threaded through the bone ends in a jaw fracture. It might stop the gap from widening,
Yeah.
but it doesn't do much to prevent twisting or shearing forces. So often something like that needs extra help, maybe maxillomandibular fixation.
Wiring the jaw shut.
That's the one, MMF. It adds stability when the primary fixation isn't rigid enough on its own.
Okay, this is fascinating. Because these two approaches, rigid stillness versus some controlled movement, they actually trigger completely different healing processes in the body.
What's truly fascinating here, I think, is how the body adapts. It has these 2 distinct strategies depending on the stability it senses. With rigid fixation, you get what's called primary or direct bone union.
Primary union, okay.
And the really peculiar thing about this, no callus forms.
Wait, really? No callus? I always thought the callus, that sort of bony lump, was the sign of healing.
That's the common picture, absolutely.
Yeah.
But it's not the only way. Primary union is different. It's quite elegant, actually.
How does it work then, without the callus?
Well, first you have these specialized cells, osteoclasts, that sort of tidy up and cross the fracture cap. They're bone-resorbing cells.
Okay.
Then blood vessels grow across, followed by the bone-building cells, the osteoblasts. These osteoblasts lay down new bone directly, forming tiny structures called osteons that bridge the gap, like microscopic spot welds. Eventually, a remodeling phase kicks in, and it converts this new bone into morphologically normal bone. It looks and works just like the original. But, and this is key, it only happens with absolute stability and a tiny, tiny gap between the fragments.
So under rigid fixation, the bone just quietly knits itself back together, almost invisibly.
From the inside out, yeah. But when there is some movement, with non-rigid fixation, that's a different story.
That's when the callus appears.
Exactly. That's secondary or indirect bone healing. This happens when there's mobility. You get that periosteel callus forming around the outside.
Right.
There's also some resorption of the fragment ends, and then this whole process of tissue differentiation. It goes from fibrous tissue to cartilage, and then finally to bone.
And the callus is essential for that process if there's movement.
Absolutely crucial. Bone just cannot form properly across a mobile gap without it. The callus acts like nature's internal splint.
Nature's internal fixation. I like that.
It provides enough stability so the actual bone formation, ossification, can happen. So if you see a callus on an X-ray, that's a sign there was some motion at the fracture site.
Yeah.
The body had to build that scaffold first.
That really flips the script on how you think about healing. It's not just one way. Now, you mentioned non-rigid fixation allows some movement. Is there a sweet spot, a type of non-rigid fixation that's sort of good enough?
Yes, and that leads us to a really important concept. Functionally stable fixation.
Functionally stable. Okay.
This is a key type of non-rigid fixation. It's strong enough that the patient can actually use their jaw, function during healing, but it doesn't prevent all microscopic movement.
So it's stable enough for use, but still allows a tiny bit of wiggle.
Precisely. And what's really interesting is, clinically, the results with functionally stable fixation are often excellent.
Any examples of that?
The classic one is the Champy technique for mandibular angle fractures using a single small mini plate along the top edge. It definitely allows some micromotion, but patients generally heal very well with it.
And this wasn't just a minor observation, was it? Didn't it lead to a bigger shift in thinking?
A huge shift. In 1994, the AOASIF group, the Swiss Association for the Study of Internal Fixation, a major global player in fracture care, they actually changed their core principle.
From what to what?
From recommending rigid internal fixation as the gold standard to advocating for functionally stable fixation.
Wow. Why the change?
Because the clinical evidence was just so strong. They saw that achieving functional stability led to consistently good outcomes, even without absolute rigidity. Biology trumped pure mechanics, in a way.
So what does this all mean? It sounds like absolute rigidity isn't always the best or even necessary. Maybe a little flexibility during healing is good.
It really suggests a deeper appreciation for the biology, doesn't it? That the body sometimes just needs enough stability to heal effectively, not necessarily zero movement. Which brings us to this tension between lab tests and real patients.
Ah, yes, the biomechanics versus clinical outcomes. And the jaw, the mandible, is a tough case, right? Because it moves so much.
It's unique in the face. The only mobile bone, constantly pulled by strong muscles for chewing, talking. Fixation choices there are really critical. It's different from, say, the mid-face bones, which are more static. They often just need adaptation plates to hold position.
Okay, so here's the counterintuitive bit you mentioned. What do the lab tests show?
Lab studies, biomechanical tests, consistently show that two bone plates are mechanically more stable than one. Always.
Makes sense. More hardware, more stability. Seems logical.
Logically, yes. You'd think, okay, use two plates for patients then.
What?
But the clinical studies looking at actual patient outcomes have never shown a statistically significant advantage for two plates over one.
Never.
Never conclusively. And actually, for fractures at the angle of the mandible, some studies suggest two plates might even perform worse.
Worse? How can that be?
It really raises questions about translating lab findings directly to patients. Fracture stability is critical, yes, but it's only one piece of the puzzle. Things like preserving the blood supply to the bone fragments are hugely important too. Biology is complex.
It's not just about the mechanics. The body's response matters just as much, if not more.
Exactly. Biology is the variable.
Okay, so a surgeon weighs all this up: healing type, stability needed, biology, and then has to pick the actual tools. You mentioned load-bearing versus load-sharing fixation earlier.
Right. Another key decision point. Load-bearing fixation uses a device strong enough to handle the entire functional load itself. The plate takes all the stress.
When would you need that?
Typically for really complex injuries. Comminuted fractures, where the bone is in lots of little pieces, or when there's not much good bone contact across the break. Or even if there's a gap, actual bone loss. The plate has to bridge that defect.
Acting like a temporary replacement for the bone's strength.
Precisely. Think of those big mandibular reconstruction plates we talked about earlier. They're large, stiff, meant to carry the load until the bone can consolidate or maybe get grafted. But even they are temporary and can fail over time, usually by screw loosening or the plate breaking.
And load sharing. That sounds like teamwork.
It is. Load-sharing fixation uses a device that isn't strong enough to take all the load alone. It relies on the bone fragments themselves, on either side of the fracture, being solid enough to share that load.
So the bone and the plate work together.
Exactly. This is used for simpler linear fractures, which thankfully are the most common type in the mandible. Things like those 2.0 millimeter mini plates or lag screws, where the compression itself makes the bone share the load.
And the crucial difference, you can't use load sharing if the bone is shattered into tiny bits or missing.
Correct. There just isn't enough solid bone next to the fracture to resist the forces. The bone has to be able to contribute.
This makes me think, different parts of the jaw must experience different forces, right? It's not just one uniform bone.
Absolutely not. It's very dynamic. Take fractures at the angle of the jaw. Under chewing forces, they tend to gap open at the top edge of the superior border. That's the tension zone.
So putting a plate there is most effective.
Far more effective than at the bottom edge. Even relatively small plates, like a single champy minute plate along that superior border, can control those tension forces quite well.
What about fractures further forward in the body of the mandible?
They also tend to gap at the top. But as you move further forward, you get more twisting or torquing forces. This can cause misalignment side to side at the bottom edge.
So maybe you need something more than just a top plate.
Often, yes. An arch bar wired to the teeth might stop the gap up top, but you might need a plate or lag screws lower down to stop that twisting.
And the very front, the chin area, the symphysis.
That area gets hit with significant shearing forces and twisting. It's mechanically complex. That's why surgeons usually opt for 2 points of fixation there.
Like 2 plates?
Yeah, 2 plates or maybe 2 lag screws, or sometimes 1 plate or screw plus an arch bar, something to really resist those complex rotational forces.
You mentioned 2 points of fixation. We touched on 1 versus 2 plates earlier. Is 2 always better if you can do it?
Generally, 2 points offer more stability, but the placement is critical. To get the best mechanical advantage, they need to be as far apart as possible.
Ah, so if the bone isn't very tall.
Exactly, like in an atrophic mandible one that's lost height and bone density. Putting 2 small plates very close together doesn't help much mechanically. A single, stronger plate placed lower down might actually be better.
Yeah.
And you always have to worry about avoiding tooth roots and nerves, of course.
Makes sense. What about compression plates versus non-compression plates?
Compression plates do what the name says. They actively squeeze the bone ends together. This increases friction and stability. They're used when you're really aiming for that absolute rigidity, that primary bone healing.
Any downsides?
They rely on that compression. If any micromotion happens, they can loosen. Non-compression plates, well, they just hold the position without actively squeezing.
And fitting into this picture are the locking plate systems. You said they've been a big change.
A really significant development, yeah. The key difference is the screw head locks into the plate itself, creates a fixed angle construct.
And the main advantage is?
The plate doesn't need to be perfectly pressed against the bone surface to provide stability. When you tighten a traditional screw, it pulls the bone to the plate, which can sometimes shift the alignment you carefully achieved.
Ah, I see.
With locking screws, they lock into the plate, stabilizing the fragments without squishing the bone against the plate. It preserves the reduction better.
So better alignment control. Any other benefits?
They're less likely to loosen from the bone over time, which might mean less inflammation or infection risk. And they generally offer more stability across the gap itself.
Sounds like a clear winner. Are they always used now?
They're very popular, especially when a surgeon chooses a non-compression approach. The theoretical advantages are clear, though studies are still ongoing to quantify the clinical improvement in all situations.
Yeah.
But yeah, they're a major tool now.
Okay, so even with the best plates, locking or not, chosen perfectly, there's still this issue of the hardware itself potentially failing over time, plate fatigue.
Yes, that's the silent enemy, you could say. Plates, even titanium ones, can break. It's called fatigue failure. It happens from repeated cyclic loading, just the normal stresses of chewing and talking over and over.
Titanium can break. I thought it was super strong.
It is strong, but it's also more brittle than bone. Bone can flex and remodel. Metal eventually fatigues under enough cycles.
Are there areas where this is more of a problem?
Definitely. The condylar process, the jaw joint area, is one. It constantly tilts side to side during movement. And the other big one is the atrophic mandible.
The one with less bone mass, you mentioned wishboning earlier?
Yes, it's a very descriptive term. Because there's less bone, the whole U shape of the mandible flexes more during function in and out, like a wishbone. And the less bone there is, the more it flexes. This puts huge repetitive stress on any plate trying to hold it together.
So the solution is just stronger plates in those areas?
Essentially, yes. For combo fractures, maybe thicker plates, or using 2 minute plates. For atrophic mandibles, you pretty much always need those heavy-duty reconstruction bone plates. It comes back to that AOASA principle.
Let me guess. The weaker the bone, the stronger the plate must be.
You got it. The hardware has to compensate for the bone's lack of inherent strength and resist that chronic flexing.
This whole picture gets even more layered when someone has multiple fractures, which you said is actually pretty common.
Yeah, almost half of mandible fractures aren't isolated. People often have 2 or more breaks.
And that complicates things significantly.
Exponentially. With multiple breaks, especially on both sides, the whole structure becomes much less stable. Segments displace more easily, and the whole jaw can tend to widen because you've lost that bilateral support.
So you can't just fix each break independently. You have to think systemically.
Absolutely. You've hit the nail on the head. The fixation plan has to consider the whole mandible. If you have simple linear fractures on both sides, maybe you treat one side with more rigid fixation to provide overall stability.
Like, say, an angle fracture on one side and a body fracture on the other.
Right. You might use a single mini plate for the angle fracture, but opt for more rigid fixation, maybe 2 plates, or a stronger plate, plus an arch bar on the body fracture side to better control the overall shape and function.
What about the really complex patterns? You mentioned a book opening fracture. Sounds bad.
It's probably the most challenging scenario. That's typically a fracture right in the middle of the chin, the symphysis, combined with fractures of the condyles, the jaw joints, especially if both condyles are broken.
Why is that so bad?
Because the strong jaw muscles tend to pull the whole mandible backwards and downwards. And without any stable support at the back, the broken condyles, the two sides of the jaw can literally splay outwards at the front, open like a book.
Yikes. How do you stop that?
Depends on how you treat the condyle fractures. If they're treated closed, non-surgically, then you need very stable fixation at the front, at the symphysis, to hold the width. That might mean a big reconstruction plate, or maybe 2 well-placed lag screws, or 2 strong plates.
But if you fix the condyles surgically,
If you open and fix the condyle fractures, restoring that posterior support, then the symphysis fracture becomes less critical for overall stability. You can treat it more like an isolated fracture, potentially with less hardware. It's all about understanding those force vectors across the whole damaged structure.
wow. We've really gone from a simple idea, fix a broken bone, into this incredibly detailed world. Rigid versus non-rigid, primary versus secondary healing, functionally stable fixation. That shift in thinking is huge.
It really is. And then layering on the biomechanics versus the clinical reality, load bearing versus load sharing, locking plates, it's intricate.
Yeah, and considering the specific forces in different parts of the jaw, the challenge of weak bone, multiple fractures, it gives you a real appreciation for the expertise involved.
Absolutely. Choosing the right approach and the right hardware for each unique situation is crucial for getting patients back to chewing, talking, living normally, restoring function safely.
Fascinating stuff. So, thinking about all this, the body's different healing strategies, the way surgeons balance control versus allowing natural processes, does it make you think about that balance elsewhere? Absolute control versus letting things heal or develop more naturally, maybe less rigidly in other parts of life or even technology. What really stands out to why you from all this?